This is episode 52 of the Why Not Me podcast, Personality Blueprint, Part 3, Clifton Strengths. I'm your host, Anita Bremer. I'm a wife, mom, member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and a life coach. And I believe when you know who you are, you can be the best you at what you're called to do. This requires faith, wisdom, and mental wellness. That's what we talk about here. Okay, so episode 50 is officially in the feed. Hopefully, you were able to get to it faster than I was. But in that episode, I kind of tell you all about what this project is with these personality tools. So I didn't realize that it wasn't in the feed until after I recorded and uploaded the last episode. So I didn't do a thorough recap. But basically, I love learning about personality and how it influences us and our identity and our lives. And so it started out as kind of like a project that I was doing just for fun, right? Just because I'm like, I just want to do this. It sounds like fun. And I took some former clients through this process of going through 6 tools. They're not all like personality tests the way the Myers-Briggs type indicator is. But we cover these 6 tools and then we do like a strategy session with them as sort of the last session. So it was just a fun thing. And then I thought, oh, it might be fun to do some podcast episodes about this. So here we are. Episode 50 was about Gretchen Rubin's 4 tendencies, and episode 51 was about the Myers-Briggs type indicator. And today we're going to talk about CliftonStrengths, formerly known as StrengthsFinder. So I'm going to give you kind of an overview. Actually, first, I'm going to tell you about my journey to finding out my strengths and learning about my strengths. And then I'm going to give you kind of a big scale overview. And I'm going to tell you a story at the end, and then I'll go into what my top 5 strengths are, just as sort of a little taste of what the Clifton Strengths will sort of give to you as like if you were to do this tool. Okay. So the first thing I want to say is that there is a slight drawback to the Clifton Strengths because it does cost money to get results to this, I guess I'll call it a test. It's not really a test as in right and wrong answers. And it's $20 to get your top 5 strengths and $50 to get your full report. I personally have found that it is worth it. It's something I did probably like 5 months ago, and I'm still thinking about it and chewing on it. And there's a lot of meat to understand, and I have found it very helpful, which I wouldn't be talking about it here if I didn't. But the way I came to this is I had heard of Clifton Strengths Finder. Now it's just Clifton Strengths. But I had looked into it, and I think I checked the book out from the library at one time, but I never was willing to like pay the $20 to take the test. And so it just sort of went off of my radar. Well, earlier this year, in fact, at the very beginning of 2021, I enrolled in an advanced deep dive coach training with Bev Aaron. And I went through that training. And then at the end, I felt this intuitive pull to ask Bev if she had any need for somebody to work for her. And she asked me a few questions. And then she said, yeah, this might work. And so I ended up working for Bev. It didn't end up working out long term, but I love Bev. I have all the respect for her. It was a mutual non-fit for us. But one thing, when I first approached her, she asked me to take my Clifton Strengths test to find out what my strengths were. And she says, I'm specifically looking for somebody that has kind of an opposite set of strengths to her. So I thought, oh, well, I've always wanted to take this test. So I took the test and showed her the results. And after that point, she was like, yeah, let's try it. Right. Because my strengths were very opposite of Bev's strengths. So once I had that in hand and kind of had the report of my strengths and all of that, which I'll talk about more in a minute, it started to intrigue me and I started to get really curious. It's a vast kind of report though, and I knew I would need help from somebody else to help me kind of like make sense of it and figure out how it would look in my life. So I reached out to another coach who I knew did that kind of work. Her name is Allegra Stein, and she's amazing. I totally recommend any coach go work with her because she works with coaches and she helps them find kind of their own special sauce, their own coaching superpowers. So allegrastein.com is where you can find her. I love her so much. And we had some contact, I think, like a year and a half before. She was just asking coaches to have conversations with her. So I had a conversation with her. And because of that, I kind of had an idea of the work she was doing. And so I reached out to her and I just asked, are you still doing this kind of work? I'm interested. I want to know how I can use my strengths in my business. Instead of trying to like change myself to fit my business, I want to change my business to fit who I am and what my strengths are. And I would love help with that. And so she just happened to be enrolling and she does kind of these small group cohorts. And so I jumped into one of those and like the rest truly is history. Like it was a very pivotal time for me to get to know my strengths. She does more than just strengths. It's just one of the tools she uses. But I even have still on the back of my office door, all these different colored sticky notes that come from diving into my strengths from the CliftonStrengths tool and learning how to like make it my own. It's still a work in progress, even after these few months. But I am seeing the value in it and I am really enjoying kind of discovering more. So, overview of CliftonStrengths. There are a total of 34 strengths, and this is based off of lots of research, like decades, I want to say 20 or 30 years of research of kind of these 34 main ways that people show strengths. I don't quite know the whole background on, how they came up with these, but I think it used to be in like the 150 range and they whittled it down to 34. At least if I'm recalling correctly from the book, that is kind of what happened. The strengths come in 4 categories. The categories are executing, influencing, relationship building, and strategic thinking. So executing is like getting things done. Influencing is using your voice or your personality or something to influence other people. Relationship building is just what it is, based off of relationships. And strategic thinking is like a logical based sort of category of strength. So the story that I wanted to tell you has come to me second or third hand. I'm not 100% sure, but I think I heard this story from James Clear, but it could have been somebody else out there. And it's a story reportedly by Warren Buffett and one of his employees that used to be a pilot, used to pilot one of his planes. So Warren Buffett is one of the richest men alive. He's known for his ability to, manage wealth and, invest in the stock market and things like that. And this story, so it goes, I hope I don't butcher it, is that he was having a conversation with another man, this pilot that would fly him places. And he told the pilot to write down a list of the top 25 things he would like to accomplish in his life. And he said, go do that, think about it, take some time with it. And then when you do that, come back to me and tell me what they are. So the pilot came back to Mr. Buffett and told him the 25. And Mr. Buffett then told him, okay, now prioritize that list and come up with your top 5 priorities for your whole life. And so he left him on his way and the pilot did that and then returned back to Warren Buffett. And Warren Buffett asked the pilot, okay, now that you have your top 5, what are you going to do with the other 20? And the pilot said something like, well, I'm not going to put as much energy and effort toward them, but I'll still work on them here and there when I have a chance. And Warren Buffett told him, no, that's where you go wrong. What your job is to do now is to completely ignore priority number 6 through 25. Because these top 5 priorities, that's where the money is. That I'm using that, in a not literally. That's what you should focus on. Numbers 1 through 5. First focus on number 1. And when you have gotten number 1, then go to number 2. And, priority number 100 isn't going to be a distraction to you. It's going to be priority number 6. That's a distraction to you, or priority number 10, right? Those ones that are like still kind of high up there, but aren't as high as the top 5. And that made me think of CliftonStrengths. Basically, when you take the test for CliftonStrengths, and the test it's an online test, it's pretty lengthy. It takes about 45 minutes. And it's, when you go through the instructions, it says to answer as quickly as possible. And there's a timer on the answers. So you really have to go quickly through the questions. And they ask all kinds of questions. And it gives you this report of your top 5 strengths, and then your number 6 through number 34 strength, and the order of them. So because there are 34 strengths, it is very, 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 very unlikely that anybody else on earth would share your same strengths in the same order, right? Really, all the 34 strengths are the same for everyone. It's just the order of them. Sometimes you will find somebody who has a very similar top 5 list. I worked with Allegra Stein, and everybody went through their strengths and would list them and talk about them. And I never once, I don't know how many people were in that program, 30 or 40, maybe more. I never once saw somebody with the very same top 5 strengths as me. There were a couple people that had like 3 out of the 5 or 4 out of the 5. But even so, they weren't in the same order. And the order matters, although you do have some agency over that. So when I heard this story about Warren Buffett and his pilot, it really did kind of crack something open in me in understanding that my job is to understand my top 5 strengths. You could call it top 5, top 6, whatever, the top very few, and to only manage the rest of my strengths and manage my weaknesses, right? Which could mean hiring them out or ignoring them or delegating them in some way. You can get creative with how you manage them. But the real work is to know what those top 5 are and embrace them and learn about them and utilize them to the best and fullest of your abilities. And let me tell you, that's not necessarily an easy thing to do. Okay, so I'm going to go into my top 5 strengths just as an example, because I want to give you an idea of the kind of depth that doing the CliftonStrengths will give you. And I will say also that the Gallup CliftonStrengths website is a plethora of information, YouTube videos, like just all kinds of things that once you have kind of purchased the report, they have books, they have other reports, they have things, other things that you can purchase, but there's really, really a lot of information, a lot of depth that you can go into. I have barely scratched the surface, honestly, for myself. So here are my strengths. My top 5 in order are learner, restorative, discipline, intellection, and input. I'm going to go through those one by one and tell you what they mean. Learner strength. Basically, what this means, it says, and I'm kind of reading off of my report here, people who are especially talented in the learner theme have a great desire to learn and want to continuously improve. In particular, the process of learning rather than the outcome excites them. This is very true for me. I love learning. One of my very favorite things is to read and to listen to podcasts, not for entertainment necessarily, but because I love it when I'm like learning new concepts and thinking about different things and making connections with other parts of my life or whatever. Um, this is kind of a little bit longer of a paragraph, but I'm going to read it for this strength. I won't read it for all the rest, but it just kind of gives you an idea. And this is just sort of the overview. And these are personalized to you depending on your other strengths as well. So it says, what makes you stand out? Because of your strengths, you habitually bring together all sorts of information so you can refer to it later. At the instant you collect a fact, example, story, or piece of data, typically you are eager to use it. You trust it is valuable. Your fascination with knowledge has probably been part of you even before you formed the words to ask your first question. Driven by your talents, you can block out distractions when you are working or studying. You are seldom pulled away from a task. You probably desire to understand ahead of time what needs to be done. You also expect to receive background briefings and or a list of projects criteria. Armed with this information, you move closer to your goal. With ease and certitude, that is, having no doubts, you determine what is and is not important to know about an activity, event, or project. By nature, you might prefer to enroll in a difficult class rather than register for the easiest one. Perhaps comparing how well you are doing in relation to others has meaning only when you earn the best grades in the hardest courses. To some extent, you crave recognition for your knowledge and winning spirit. Chances are good that you are diligent about examining what needs to be revamped, revised, modified, or fixed. When you are absorbed in these activities, hours pass quickly. You can dedicate yourself to correcting a single problem, especially when it directly and dramatically affects you. You probably read, listen, observe, discuss, experiment, and experience as much as you can to fill your mind with fresh ideas. Instinctively, you thirst for new ideas and knowledge. Often you lose yourself in a book. You pore over the ideas contained in its pages for long stretches of time. Why? You want to absorb as much information as you can. So, that is kind of the longer paragraph for the overview for the learner strength. I resonate with a lot of this, not all of it, but a lot of it. Specifically like fascination with knowledge and being able to block out distractions, not being pulled away from a task. Like you can ask my husband, I struggle with task switching. That's where I usually go off the rails in my time management is when I'm switching from one task to the next. I love knowledge for knowledge's sake. I love learning. I just love it. In fact, I homeschooled my kids for 5 years and I think I enjoyed it more than they did. Um, I really enjoyed being in charge of what we were learning and how we were learning it. And like learning some of these like more basic things as an adult or like teaching them, which is just like a renewal of learning. Um, I just really got a lot of satisfaction from that. Okay, so my number 2 strength is restorative. That's the name of the strength. It says people who are especially talented in the restorative theme are adept at dealing with problems. They are good at figuring out what is wrong and resolving it. So it could be like a skill deficiency or a knowledge gap or a performance shortcoming, those kinds of things. It, I mean, you can apply this to any area. It could be like, furniture restoration, or it could be organizing a closet or, something like that. This can be applied. It's just this ability to see what the problem is and fix it. Now, I will say having the learner strength and the restorative strength as my top 2, sometimes I can turn those strengths against myself. I can look at what I think is wrong with me and try to fix it and get lost in like the constant fixing and trying to make myself better. So, of course, every strength is going to have a bit of a drawback. And that's part of understanding your strengths and understanding like what to watch out for. The one thing I just wanted to pause and say here is that one thing I've noticed going over Myers-Briggs, Enneagram, Gretchen Rubin's 4 tendencies, the strengths, the values, and Simon Sinek's why, find your why exercise. I think the most value comes in seeing where the overlap is, because there are strong themes. As I took a few people through this process, I started to notice these themes like, oh, this came up in Enneagram, this came up in Myers-Briggs, this came up in strengths. And so those are the things that are like really the pinnacle of your strengths and your personality, but are the positive parts. Like if you really view them as positives, then you can learn how to utilize them and use them to your fullest advantage. My third strength is called intellection. I might have had this in the wrong order when I listed them before, because when I worked with Allegra Stein, the Clifton Strengths will order them for you, but she said, ignore that, just figure out what feels the best to you, what feels in line to you with what's your top strength, your second, your third. She kind of used this analogy of driving a car, how there's usually like one driving strength, and then there's a couple that are passengers, and then there's a couple that are fuel. And so that's kind of how I worked it. And I know for sure that learner and restoration are the top two. And then 3, 4, and 5 can really go any order. But this, I'm going to say number 3 is intellection. And it's people who are especially talented in the intellection theme are characterized by their intellectual activity. They are introspective and appreciate intellectual discussions. So this is my strength that makes me want to come and do a podcast, because I love talking about the things that I'm learning. It's one of the things that and I think I've mentioned this before on the podcast. One of the things I've learned about myself in recent years is that I am a verbal processor, which means I can think about things in my mind a lot, but it's not until I start talking about them out loud with somebody that then I hear myself say things and I'm like, oh, that's what it is. Like I can put a word to it. I can describe it more fully. In my head, it's still kind of oftentimes a jumbled mess until I start talking about it and go back and forth in conversation. Then it starts getting organized for me personally. This also is what makes it like, I love bearing my testimony. I love bearing my testimony in testimony meeting, but really at any time, I love bearing my testimony in, Sunday school or Relief Society or to my family or whatever, not because I think that my family or other people are going to benefit so much from it. I mean, I hope that is the case, but I don't ever assume that is the case, but because I benefit so much. I cannot tell you how many times I have walked up to the stand on a fast and testimony meeting, not knowing what I was going to say, but feeling totally compelled to bear my testimony. And then sitting down and being like, I need to journal that today because that was like significant. Like I learned something from my own testimony. So this strength, this intellection strength, is what drives me to verbally process and to have a desire to be in conversation with people about ideas and thoughts and, just concepts in general. And this is why I think I love podcasts, because podcasts are somebody else's ideas and somebody else's point of view that then I get to listen to. And then it like triggers things in my mind. Right. So I love that strength. Number 4 is input. People who are especially talented in the input theme have a craving to know more. Often they like to collect and archive all kinds of information. So when I first saw this strength, I was like, really? I don't know about that. I don't really like to collect things. But when I thought about it in terms of information, collecting information, I was like, yeah, I guess that's true. I've always been a journaler. I instinctively kind of keep track of things like, for example, our families, like pictures and cards and sort of memorabilia that you accumulate, right? I can't throw that stuff away. I feel like this needs to be kept. It's a record of our family life and who we are. And so I have a system for hanging on to those things and then really archiving them. in a way that makes them accessible to everyone. I can't say that I'm never overwhelmed by that, but it is something that I naturally do, is kind of collect. Um, this this strength, I love thinking about it in terms of that analogy that Allegra Stein taught me, which is like the driver and the passengers and the fuel, because I can very much see how input fuels my learner strength and my intellection strength. So, people who have this high on their list probably read a lot or study a lot in whatever way, and reflect upon what they are learning and what they are collecting. And number 5 strength is called discipline. People who are especially talented in the discipline theme enjoy routine and structure. Their world is best described by the order they create. For a long time, I used to say, my forte is creating order out of chaos. I've always been kind of an organizer and that kind of thing. So I very much resonate with this strength as well. And this can be also a theme, a strength that applies to many different areas. It doesn't have to be like organizing stuff. It can be organizing ideas, in routine and structure. This I see overlaps a lot with my Myers-Briggs, which I'm a pretty extreme J, the judger, that last letter, which is what determines like how people perceive you in the world on the outside. I like things to be kind of decided and have a system. And so I see that this kind of overlaps with that a lot. And just kind of generally having plans or processes. I'm not perfect at this. There are many areas of my life where I could be better and I crave being better, but sometimes real life gets in the way of actually implementing those systems that you crave. I love in this theme, it says, by nature, you likely have a reputation for producing good results. In nearly all scenarios, whether mundane or fascinating, you ensure your ongoing success by outlining clear steps for each procedure, pinpointing precise deadlines, and continually monitoring your progress. I can't say that I'm especially good at that, but it is my default to do that kind of a thing. And I will say too, it says instinctively you feel impelled to straighten up a cluttered or messy environment. That is very much truth for me. I am very affected by my environment. And I was actually just talking to my daughter today about how I don't get overwhelmed by like to-dos or like walking into a really messy room. That doesn't overwhelm me because my brain immediately goes to work on this goes there, this goes there. Okay, group these 3 things together. Give me that, give me that, give me that. It's like I just like go into like do it mode, but I do get a little bit overwhelmed by other people's emotions. So we were just talking about overwhelm and the different ways of overwhelm. And I think that this strength, this discipline strength, which helps me enjoy routine and structure and creating order, is why I don't get overwhelmed by like to-dos or like a messy room or like stuff. Sometimes I walk into a room, especially if it's my own house, like my own kitchen or dining room or something. And if it's messy or things have been left out, I kind of go, but I wouldn't say I get overwhelmed by it. I just don't always necessarily want to do the work to clean it up, especially when somebody else has been the one to make it messy. So those are my strengths and a little bit of a peek into what the CliftonStrengths would offer you. I personally find this tool very robust and very interesting and fascinating and flexible at the same time, because everybody has a slightly different order of strengths. And it's also really fascinating to look at your number 6 through 34. And for example, like the different categories. Earlier, I talked about how there were executing, influencing, relationship building, and strategic thinking. Some people have their strengths very spread out through all the categories. For me, I don't have an influencing strength until like number 15 or something like that. All of my influencing strengths come in the bottom half of my strengths. And so that's kind of interesting to note that influencing probably isn't going to be a big thing for me. It's going to be more really most of my strengths come in the executing and strategic thinking. And there are a few relationship building strengths that come like in my top 10. But I have some theories about that as well, because one of my theories is that I have a lot of trauma in my past. And one of the ways I coped with that trauma was to go into my head and to use my intellection and thinking skills to kind of take me away from the emotions of what was happening. And so I'm curious, once I like work through and process some of that trauma, if these strengths wouldn't be reordered a little bit. Because I'm very like, I would say one of my top values is more in line with relationships. So, and that's one of the reasons why I think it's so valuable to use multiple tools instead of just going all on one or two tools, because some of the strengths might show up in some of these tools, but then maybe something else will show up in your values. So it's just kind of something interesting to make a note of. That's enough for now. And so are you. If this episode made you think about yourself or others in a new way, would you please give it a rating and a review? And if you want to truly do the work of being the best you at what you do, go to danitabremmer.com to schedule a free session with me. And also go get on my email list, because I have some new offerings coming out that have to do with these personality tests. Until next time, go be you and follow the spirit.